Start recording. And now that we have some of these housekeeping items out of the way, we'd really like to start today with a welcome and a land acknowledgement. And so it's really important to emphasize the relationship between the land and people and between our histories and our futures. And so with that, I really want us to keep in mind that the statement is to really recognize the long history of Native peoples and nations that have lived and stewarded the lands where we live and maintain the connection that Native people and nations have to this land. And so with that, those are just some things to keep in mind. And I'm going to hand it off to Christian, who's going to share the statement of respect and recognition.
Aloha, good morning, everybody. So the organizers today live and work across North America and Hawaii. Our places across these geographies hold special meaning to a lot of us, each for our own reasons. And so we wanted to start this workshop with an acknowledgement of our places. This image depicts the ancestral homelands of North America's indigenous peoples prior to European contact. It highlights a continent that supported indigenous culture, millions of people who were stewards of a lot of the places that our agencies and organizations consider to be our important conservation areas across the entire continent. Next. So acknowledgement statements are becoming more common on university campuses, but also with federal land management agencies. Why give a land acknowledgement statement? The idea is that a land acknowledgement is a small but impactful gesture to start decolonizing our gathering places. Naming place aligns with Native wisdom. Many indigenous nations follow protocols before any gathering, opening with a prayer, setting intentions that connect them to the world and the cosmos. And so we acknowledge that indigenous peoples have maintained their connections to place, connections that span centuries, even while some have not been able to inhabit their ancestral homelands because of colonization, dislocation, and land theft. Recognizing there are painful histories behind how we newcomers came to occupy places where we live, work, and recreate, we acknowledge and pay respect to indigenous peoples who have stewarded and will continue to steward these places over generations. Next. We also want to share that our nation's probably first acknowledgement statement was the US government apology resolution to Kanaka Iwi. Following the 1893 overthrow of the Hawaiian nation, 1.8 million acres of Kanaka Iwi lands, nearly half of Hawaii's land base, were ceded to the US provisional government and eventual US Republic of Hawaii without the consent or compensation to Kanaka Iwi or their sovereign government. Congress passed and President Bill Clinton signed this federal legislation into law in 1993 on the 100th anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. In brief, it apologizes for the theft of Kanaka Iwi lands and associated resources. These ceded lands and resources that many of us in Hawaiian conservation steward today are important land areas, continue to be important land areas for Hawaii's indigenous people. And so we hope that with the statement, with acknowledgement and knowledge, there'll come action. So mahalo for participating in this process and really excited about moving forward in this workshop with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that powerful land acknowledgement statement. And so, as Christian said, I really hope that this is something we can all use to help guide the tone for this course as we continue to be stewards of the lands that we value in the face of a changing climate. And so again, I would like to welcome you all to the Adaptation Planning and Practices online course. And so we've offered this course since 2016 for forestry and natural resource professionals who work in both rural and urban areas. And we've started to expand it to recreation and watersheds and tribal perspectives as well. And so we really appreciate your involvement in this course and your interest, and we're excited to get to know all of you. And so these are the facilitators who are going to be helping out throughout the next 8 weeks as we work our way through the adaptation workbook process, which is the tool we're going to be using for this course. And so I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledged all of them. They'll be helping co-present and facilitate discussions. And you should have received an email from one of us reaching out to you about your step 1 for project for this course, and really starting to think about your management goals and objectives that you want to focus on for your project that you've chosen. And so we span from the Southwest Climate Hub to the Northern Forest Climate Hub, as well as the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And so a little bit of background about both. The Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science we're part of a team of climate coordinators. And we also call ourselves NIACs, led by Chris Swanson and Maria Genoviak with the Northern Research Station of the U.S. Forest Service. And we really span the boundary between academic research and the practical information and support that land managers need to make decisions about climate change on the ground. And so we're chartered by the U.S. Forest Service, different universities, nonprofits, and tribal conservation organizations. And we really provide practical information, resources, and technical assistance related to climate and carbon services, such as impacts modeling and vulnerability assessments, climate adaptation strategies and approaches, carbon biogeochemistry, and carbon management. And so most of our work really centers on helping natural resource managers make those climate-informed decisions for your management on the ground. And then other facilitators are also part of the USDA Climate Hubs, which are a unique collaboration across the USDA departments agencies. And so they're led by the Agricultural Research Service and the Forest Service senior directors that are located at 10 different regional locations with contributions from many other USDA programs as well. And so the mission of the Climate Hubs is to develop and deliver science-based regional specific information and technologies with USDA agencies and partners to agricultural and natural resource managers that enable climate-informed decision-making and provide access to assistance to implement those decisions. And so again, we have facilitators from the Southwest Climate Hub, which covers 5 states, including Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, and the Northern Forest Climate Hub, which covers about 20 states in the Midwest and the Northeast. And then I also wanted to send a huge mahalo and thank you to our local partners who have really been instrumental in helping put together this course and getting input from all of you. And so I wanted to thank Christian, Abby, Ryan, Katie, and Elliot, who have all provided a huge amount of expertise and support in developing and helping us put together this course, and will be helping us make sure it runs smoothly as we work together over the next 8 weeks. And so the agenda for today, we're going to provide a really short overview of what to expect over the next 8 weeks. And then we want to start diving into content. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that step 1 worksheet and have that explanation of what we were thinking with your goals and objectives and some things to consider. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the adaptation workbook and how to really start working your way through this online tool that we're going to be using for the content for this course. And then we're going to end with a discussion about your projects and give you all a chance to introduce your projects yourselves and some of the things that you're thinking about for the ecosystems and the units that you manage and that you're excited to work through over the next 8 weeks with us. And so, again, with this adaptation planning and practices course, we really want to work with you to figure out how to integrate climate change considerations into your real world projects for forests and native ecosystems in Hawaii. And so what we're going to do over the next 8 weeks are really start to think about identifying those local climate change impacts. What are the different challenges and opportunities that those impacts create to management on the ground? We want to develop those specific actions to help adapt to changing conditions. And so you're going to be using your knowledge and your expertise of the areas you manage to really think about what makes the most sense to address those impacts and then help those systems adapt into the future under a changing climate. And so really what we're doing throughout this course is creating a climate-informed project for you to be able to use and reference, and then have a framework for this process to be able to reference again for future projects that you work on as well. And so we also will have a session on climate change communication. And so hopefully this will also create that opportunity for better communication with your partners and different audiences, and you'll have access and post-training support from both NIACS and the Climate Hub staff during this planning process and as you move forward with potentially doing implementation of these projects. And so some course format and expectations. Again, we're really hoping that you can participate all 8 weeks. We're going to be meeting every Tuesday from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Hawaii time. And so this will run from January 26th through March 16th. There is one vacation week where we will not have a course session. So I'm sorry if that was confusing with the calendar invite I sent out, but that was a cancellation just for that 1 week of February 15th, because there's a federal holiday that week. So we're just gonna take a break that 1 week and rejoin the following week in February. And so what the plan is we'll have a combination of presentations and discussion to really provide some of that content for thinking through the adaptation workbook process. But then we also want to make sure you all have a chance to share your ideas and suggestions with each other and get feedback on the projects you're working on. And so each session every Tuesday really is going to be a combination of presentations and discussions. And so we really want you to be able to take advantage of opportunities to check in with us as the course facilitators, but also with each other, and to get that feedback from each other and build that sense of community through this online course as well. And we have applied for continuing education credits. And so if you're interested in that, be sure that you let Maddie or I know, and we can work with you to track your attendance so that you can get those continuing education credits. So you've all seen this in the course syllabus that was sent around. This is just the weekly schedule and the sessions and the topics that we're going to cover. And so really we're starting with defining our projects and our goals and objectives today, all the way through coming up with those adaptation actions and a monitoring plan, and then sharing your story with everyone who's participating in this course. And so if you have questions, you can always refer back to that course syllabus for a weekly outline of what to expect. And then there is what we call homework. Basically, the homework is really just working your way through this online adaptation workbook tool and making sure that you are keeping up each week with the content that's being provided so that you can really come to that next Tuesday session prepared for those discussions that we're going to have with a larger group about thinking about climate change impacts, thinking about challenges and opportunities for your projects that you manage, and thinking about those adaptation actions. And so each week we'll walk you through step by step what to consider and what to think about for the next week. But again, if the more you can use this online adaptation workbook tool, the more prepared you'll be for those discussions the following week. And then we do ask that when you're participating in these courses that you are fully engaged to the extent possible. I know working from home has its own challenges, and there's kids and pets and stuff that might wander in, and that's totally fine. But we do ask that when you're participating in this course, if you could please try to close your email and mute your cell phone and be as present physically and mentally as possible. We would really appreciate it. And again, this is a really great opportunity to collaborate with your classmates or your colleagues who are participating in this course, and to share your ideas and your struggles. And so we really want to make sure that there's as many opportunities to do that and share that knowledge as possible. And then finally, again, with the continuing education credits, we are eligible for 22 Category 1 continuing SAF credits from the Society of American Foresters, and we're in the process of confirming eligibility for 9 CEUs for the International Society of Arboricultures. And so if those are important for you, again, please let Maddie or myself know. You can send us a chat or send us an email, and we'll make sure you get those by the end of this course. And if there's other organizations we should apply to continuing education credits for, definitely let us know that as well, and we can make sure we pursue that. So at this point, I want to pause and just see if anyone has any questions about the overall structure of what the next 8 weeks are going to look like. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or type it into the chat box. All right, not hearing any. I'm going to keep going, But again, feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box as we're working our way through this presentation. So before we get started talking about adaptation planning and practices, it's really important that we all are grounded in a definition of what we mean by adaptation. And so for this course, we really define adaptation as the adjustment of systems in response to climate change. And so there are a lot of other larger and longer definitions, but they ultimately all boil down to this. And so adaptation actions are really designed to help us intentionally address climate change impacts and vulnerabilities in order to meet our management goals and objectives. And so the activities that we're already doing for sustainable management or conservation or restoration are all also adaptation actions, because they're all really helping us intentionally think about how we want to meet our management goals and objectives. And in this course, what we're really doing is adding that climate change specific lens to what we're already doing on the ground to help enhance the actions that we're doing and really intentionally consider climate change in our adaptation actions. And so what it ultimately boils down to is, what do you value about the systems that you manage, and how much risk are you willing to tolerate under a changing climate moving forward to continue to meet your goals and objectives? So when it comes to adaptation, there is no single answer. There's no solution or one size fits all option for integrating climate change into natural resource management and the work that we're doing as managers on the ground. And so really what this course is providing is this framework for us to really think about, what do you value, what do you care about, and how much risk are you willing to tolerate when we're thinking about climate change impacts moving forward. And so every landowner is going to be different in what you value, whether it's water protection or wildlife, or you want to focus on carbon sequestration or forest diversity. And so each decision we make for adaptation is going to build upon what those values are and what your goals and objectives are, which is why this step one is so important for grounding us before we work our way through the rest of this course. And so depending on your values, the culture, the resources you're considering, where you're located and what those site conditions are, what your goals and objectives for management are, and then the capacity and equipment and different procedures or methods you're already using on the ground, means that your adaptation actions are going to look different from someone else who might be in a neighboring unit or might be managing a similar ecosystem, but they have different goals or different capacity. And so those are all things we're going to be considering as we work our way through this course. And what we're going to use is a tool called the Forest Adaptation Resources. And so we call this the FAR for short. And it's got a lot of content in it, but basically what we're going to be using are two parts, which is the adaptation workbook with the online tool we're going to be working our way through, which is a 5-step adaptation management framework where we really integrate your values and climate change impacts into each step of the process. And the second thing we're going to be using from the FAR are these strategies and approaches, which we call menus, which provide some examples of adaptation actions. And so once we get to a specific point in the adaptation workbook, we're really going to be pulling these strategies and approaches as a tool for considering climate change adaptation actions that you can implement on the ground based on your local considerations. And so the whole point of the adaptation workbook process is to really provide this flexible process where, again, you're intentionally considering climate in all of your land stewardship activities. And so it really is an adaptive management framework where we have integrated your values, goals, and objectives, and then climate considerations into each step. And so all 8 weeks of this course are really going to focus on working our way through this 5-step adaptive management framework, starting with defining where you're working and your management goals and objectives, then moving into really assessing climate change impacts and vulnerabilities. And that's where we're going to really pull from your local knowledge, vulnerability assessments, scientific literature, traditional ecological knowledge, and other resources to really think about what are those local impacts going to be for the projects you're managing. And then after we have that information, step 3 is to really evaluate our management goals and objectives given those climate change vulnerabilities. So we really want to take that step and second to pause and consider, do our goals and objectives still make sense given these climate change impacts that we've learned about in step 2? Then in step 4 is where we really get to dive into what does adaptation actions look like in the projects you're managing and the projects you're using for this course. And so that's where we really want to identify those adaptation strategies, approaches, and prescriptive actions based on your knowledge and expertise, but then pulling in some of these menus as a resource as well. And then finally, we wrap it all up by monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of our actions and making sure that they're still going to help us achieve those goals and objectives into the future. So this is the 5 steps we're going to be walking through throughout the next 8 weeks. And then we're also going to include a communication session and give you all a chance to share what you come up with throughout this course with a presentation the last week if you're interested in doing that. And so we also have over 400 examples of projects that have gone through this process. A lot of them are focused in the Midwest and Northeast, which is where the NIAC's footprint is, but we have examples from California and New Mexico and other parts of the country as well. And so we ask that once you've gone through this process with us, we really want to provide demonstrations of what adaptation can look like on the ground. And so all of these little dots are examples of projects and people who have gone through this adaptation workbook process and have really created these demonstration examples of what adaptation can look like in the ecosystems that they're managing and that they work in. And so at the end of this course, if you're interested, we would love for you to add an example demonstration project to this website as well, and let us know if that's something that you would be interested in doing to help share your story and provide some of those on the ground examples of what adaptation can look like. And so again, you can just click on any of those dots and it'll give you specific information for that project. And so with that, I just want to take another second to pause and see if there's any questions at this point about adaptation in general. All right, I'm not seeing any come through. So now what I want to do is really start to dive into the first step of the adaptation workbook process. And so this is kind of what we asked you to do as pre-work before showing up for this course, and what we're going to spend the rest of this week focusing on before we all come together again next Tuesday. And so step 1 is to really identify your project and figure out what is the location, what are the timeframes, and what are your management goals and objectives. And so again, the key questions for step 1 are: where are you working, and what are your management goals and objectives for this area? And so this is really, we're hoping you're bringing some real world projects to this course that you can use. So something that you're already planning to do or will do after this course. And so if it's something you're working on and you would like more time to focus on, this course is a great opportunity to focus on that project. And so as we're thinking about the projects for this course, we really want to find something that works best for this online tool that we use. And so a lot of you may be focusing at a landscape scale or across an entire national park, and that's just going to be a little bit too big for what we're trying to accomplish with this course. However, if you're really focusing on a backyard project or something less than 10 acres, that might also be a little bit too small. And so for this course to really be the most effective and for you to get the most bang for your buck out of it, we really want to find something in between. And so from past courses, we found that projects that are on the scale of perhaps 20 acres to a couple hundred acres work really well for this course. So those could be things like a forest stewardship plan for a private woodlot, or maybe it's a ranch that you're managing and you really want to focus on how climate is going to impact your management of your ranch, or one ecosystem or issue of or area of ownership. So maybe instead you want to focus on one particular management topic. So maybe you really want to focus on how can you incorporate carbon sequestration into your planning, or how are you going to specifically address insects and diseases? Those are kind of the focuses that we want for this course that'll help you narrow in on some specific goals and objectives. And so once you decide on your project, we ask that you define your management topics. And so those, we've pre-populated the adaptation workbook with some ecosystem types and land uses, but you can also include your own custom management topics. And so those might be a specific ecosystem type you want to focus on, or a land use you want to prioritize, or those might be those management topics, such as focusing on endemic forest bird habitat, or areas that are affected by rapid ohia death, or a specific invasive species that you're trying to eradicate. Those can all be some of those custom management topics that you decide to add. And then with the management units and topics, it's helpful to really think about these and split them up, because when we're thinking about climate change, it might have specific impacts to different management topics that you want to consider differently and really chunk into those bite-sized pieces. And so each management unit offers additional focus and might be important because of those specific climate change impacts or vulnerabilities to that topic or that unit. And then you might respond to those impacts or vulnerabilities in a specific way. And so how you respond to climate change impacts, for example, to a riparian forest, might be very different for some of the considerations you have to make for that prairie, or maybe you have some specific infrastructure or recreation that you really want to prioritize, and that's going to look different as well. And so really splitting it up into some of these management topics is going to be helpful for considering those local impacts and how you're going to adapt to them throughout this course. So after you do that, what we want to do is really define our management goals and objectives. And so this is what we asked you to also complete before this course started, just to help us have an idea of what everyone was thinking, and then help us allow you to refine some of those management goals and objectives moving forward. And so for the purposes of this course, a goal is usually that broad general statement, usually not quantifiable, that expresses a desired state or process to be achieved. And so it's really great to have at least one goal for each ecosystem type or each management topic that you choose to focus on throughout this course. And then also we want to include those management objectives. And so these are going to be more specific, concise statements of measurable planned results that correspond to those pre-established goals and achieving your desired outcome. And so those management objectives, it's really helpful if they're more measurable than those goals, but also you don't want them to be prescriptive actions. So we'll talk a little bit about the Goldilocks zone for our management objectives. But with our management objectives, it's helpful to try to keep them between 3 to 12. So as we're really thinking about climate impacts and actions for those objectives, if you have more than 12, it's going to get a little bit overwhelming and too much for this course. So really trying to narrow in and prioritizing the key management goals, and then those subsequent objectives that you want to focus on will be really helpful for working your way through this adaptation workbook tool. And again, just something to think about with management objectives is we want them to be SMART. So they should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And so here are just a couple of examples of the goals and objectives that you might have. So for example, one of your goals may be to increase stream connectivity along the Waimea River. And then a corresponding objective might be to remove structures that impede natural flows or create barriers to aquatic organisms. And you want to achieve that over the next 15 years. So you can see how that goal is really that big picture statement of what you want to achieve and what you value. And then that management objective is that more measurable, specific way to help achieve that goal. Another example might be you want to reduce invasive species cover. And so the management objective could be to reduce the area covered by strawberry guava from 10% to no more than 5% over the next 5 years. So those are just a couple of examples, and we've seen some great goals and objectives come through already in your step 1 worksheets. So thank you for all of your work you've done on these already. And really, it's hard for us to describe what a good goal and a good objective is. And so just by providing some of these examples, we're really hoping that it'll give you a better idea of that Goldilocks zone, what those management goals and objectives can look like moving forward for the course to make it as effective as possible for you. And so, for example, say that we have a goal to increase urban tree canopy because it's a great opportunity to enhance carbon sequestration. If you have an objective that is also to increase urban street tree cover to reduce that urban heat island effect, that might be more like a goal, and it kind of has that same overarching picture of what you want to achieve. Whereas if you have an objective of planting 20,000 trees of 3 specific species over the next 5 years, that might be too prescriptive, and some of those prescriptive actions that we really want to get to later in this course when we're thinking about adaptation. And so that Goldilocks zone is really maybe a statement about increasing urban street tree cover to 35% of the developed areas. So somewhere in that middle. It's not a prescriptive action, but it's not too broad. So it's actually something that's measurable and you can achieve. So just something to keep in mind with goals and objectives. The other thing is that this adaptation workbook really is a climate change filter. And so we want you to think of it as a tool or a way to do a gut check on your planning. And so in the end, the adaptation workbook process is really used to ensure that our goals and objectives are robust and resilient to climate-related risks and vulnerabilities. So you don't need to include climate change or resilience in your management goals and objectives. Instead, what we want you to do is really use the adaptation workbook and this course as a way to ensure that all of your goals and objectives are robust to climate change impacts. And all of the steps that we take throughout this process will help us make sure that we're doing that. And then some other things to keep in mind, if possible, please do use the goals and objectives that you already have for the projects that and the lands that you work in. And remember that your goals and objectives do not need to be related to climate change, because we will be making sure that we're incorporating that into them later in that step 3. And goals and objectives can be area-wide, or they can be specific to that particular topic or land use. And then we also want to push you to think a little bit farther into the future. So especially when it comes to management plans, a lot of our plans are for the next 5 or 10 years. But we would like you to consider thinking beyond the next 10 years, maybe 30 or even 100 years into the future, so that we're really able to think about what are those climate change impacts going to be to the areas and the lands we manage as we're seeing those impacts manifest in the next 30 to 100 years. So consider expanding your timeframes for your goals and objectives a little bit beyond your management planning timeframe of 5 or 10 years. And again, really thinking into the future. And so with that, once you actually log into the adaptation workbook, you'll go to adaptationworkbook.org and you'll have created your project, and hopefully you've associated it with this course, and that's all in the course syllabus. So if you have questions, feel free to let Maddie or I know. But when you're logged in, which many of you have already done, this is what you'll see. And so this is a snapshot of the adaptation workbook tool. And so on the left side, you can see the menu bar, and that's how you'll navigate throughout your project throughout this course. And the other thing to keep in mind is when you open each different step, there'll be an explanation of what to expect for that step, as well as a video that really dives into more details of what we are hoping you'll do in this step and what we're hoping you'll accomplish, and some different tools and resources to consider. And then I've circled the little arrows or carrots, and those are really what you want to focus on for navigation. And so you'll notice next to progress summary, that little carrot is highlighted in orange. So that represents that that's the step that you're on. And if you want that box to close so that you can actually work within the page, there's another little carrot or triangle at the bottom, and you can click on that and it'll pull it up so that you can actually use the tool and start entering your information. So those are just some little tips and tricks on how to actually navigate the workbook. And Maddie put the link in the chat, so hopefully everyone has access to that as well. And then, so this is a snapshot from step 1, and just to give you an idea of what this looks like once you're logged in. And so you'll see that step 1, the management goals and objectives tab, is the one that's open with that orange or yellow arrow on the side and that menu bar. And then the other thing to pay attention to is that when you want to incorporate information or add any information, it's going to be highlighted in those orange or yellow boxes. And so you'll see that you can add another goal or objective set. And so this is where you can go in and add your specific goals and objectives for your projects into the adaptation workbook tool. And then once you do that for the step 1, the key thing is that it'll populate all of the future steps throughout the workbook process with these goals and objectives. So you don't have to keep retyping them in for each step, but instead it'll pre-populate all of the next steps with your specific goals and objectives for your projects and the lands that you're managing. Awesome. So just a few more quick tips. You can access all of the course materials that we're talking about in the course syllabus that was sent around and within the adaptation workbook. So all of the topics and references and resources that we cover will all be linked within the adaptation workbook itself, and you can find them in that PDF copy of the course syllabus. And another thing to keep in mind is if you do have a little bit slower internet, sometimes it takes the adaptation workbook a little bit of time to save. And so you're going to want to just make sure it automatically saves, but make sure that happens before you move on. And sometimes you might want to copy some of those ideas into a Word document or something first so that you don't lose it, especially if you have slower internet, because we have run into that in a couple cases before, and you just don't want to lose your work as you're making your way through this tool. Again, we do provide those common ecosystem types, and you can incorporate your specific custom management topics by typing those into the adaptation workbook for that step 1. And then to try to reduce the complexity when you're defining your project, you might want to try to keep those custom management topics to only 3 or 4 so that it's not too overwhelming as you're working your way through this online tool. And so again, there's adaptation workbook cookbook tutorials that are incorporated into the tool, and you can watch those recorded tutorials that are embedded in each step if you have any questions, and it'll really provide that step-by-step process of how to work your way through this online tool. And Maddie and I and everyone from the Southwest Climate Hub are also here and available if you have questions or you run into any issues, and we can help you work your way through this as well. So before we get into a discussion of your projects, just for next time, before our next session, if by Monday afternoon, it would be great if you can work your way through step 1 of the adaptation workbook. And so really what this will look like for everyone who's already completed that Word document of that step 1 worksheet is to just start incorporating this into the online tool so that it's starting to populate your information for all of the next steps. And then there is a quick homework section, which is just for us to ask you some questions about how the step went. What questions do you have as you're starting to work through this course? What's your comfort level with really thinking about impacts and adaptations so that we can see if we address that as we move forward? And then please keep track of your attendance for if you're interested in those continuing education credits. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions about step 1 or the adaptation workbook.
Courtney, I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Elliot.
I'm interested about, for the adaptation workbook, do we need to be creating a username and password that's the same for a group or team working on something, or is this something everyone individually is going to do?
Great question. If you are working with a team, like Elliot and his team are, if you could use just one username and password for everyone so that you all have access to what you're incorporating, that would be ideal. Otherwise, you'll have 5 or 6 different projects where you're all incorporating different information. And so if you want it to be collaborative and consistent for all of you, having just that one username and one password will be helpful.
And one other note there is that even if you have the shared username and password, it is best due to just like different saving lags. If you can communicate with your teammates and let each other know like when you might be getting into and accessing the workbook and working on it, because unfortunately it's not quite like a live Google Docs scenario where everyone can be in there at once. So it's best to access it one at a time.
And so if you are working in teams, which a lot of you are, we do have some other tools you can use, such as an Excel file of the adaptation workbook or a Word document where you can all kind of incorporate your thoughts and feedback into those first before someone goes and incorporates them into the online tool. And so if that's something that you're interested in or would be helpful, let us know and we can email those out to you as well. Other questions? I know a lot of this is kind of strange and might not make as much sense yet, but once you start diving into the adaptation workbook tool, I promise it'll all make a lot more sense. And those tutorial videos are really helpful for if you get lost or confused along the way. Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, what we want to do now is really move into, oh, I saw one more chat come through. It looks like an email address is required to set up an account in the workbook. So should we create an email address for our group so everyone can access the same email account? You can do that. It's really up to you, Elliot, and your team and what makes the most sense. So if you have a Gmail for everyone that works, that's great. If you want to use one person's email and then just a specific password for this course, you can do that as well. Let's see. Hoku, you asked, am I in the right area? I'm not. You'll want to make sure that your project that you've created is associated with the Hawaii Adaptation Planning and Practices course. So when you go in, make sure that that's what you have selected and that you associate your project with this course. And that's the information and steps for how to do that are in that course syllabus. And if you have additional questions, feel free to email Maddie or I, and we can make sure that you're connected. I did try to go in and pre-register everyone for this course, so your project should be associated with this course when you log in with your email that you RSVP'd with.
Actually, I'm chatting a little bit with Hoku, and I think this could be relevant to everyone. He's having a little bit of an issue with when he goes to create a project. It's not letting you press OK at the end once you've put in your project information. That could be if you didn't select. You have to make sure basically all the fields are filled out and that you have also put a point on the map. So I know when I created my first one, I just kind of glanced over the map part, but you do have to put a point on there for it to confirm.
Thanks, Maddie. Awesome. Any other questions? All right. With that, we would love to hear about your projects and what you're all thinking about so far. And so what we want to do is switch to our discussion activity. And so what we're going to be doing is using the Zoom annotate feature. And so if you go up to your tools and options, you'll see view options, and then you can drag it down to annotate. And then you'll have the option to put a symbol or draw or add some text. And so if everyone is able to find that annotate, feel free to go ahead and practice right now on this screen. And so again, you'll go up to those view options and pull up annotate, and then you can pick a stamp and go ahead and stamp it onto the screen to make sure it works. Awesome. I like the smiley face. Perfect.
Oh, I think that's a tree, maybe. David drew a tree.
Nice. All right. Thanks, everyone. It looks like you are getting the hang of it. So with that, figure out where my mouse went. Somewhere. All right. We are going to clear all of the drawings. All right, so now what we want you to do is put a stamp for where your project is located on all of these islands. And so, perfect, thanks everyone. I know that there might not be enough room for everyone, so if that's the case, we'll adjust for that when we actually ask you to describe your project. Awesome. I'm seeing all of those start to show up. And then Maddie, would you be willing to take a screen capture of this for us? Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. And I do realize that the Pacific Islands and the mainland are not on this map. And so if you are located somewhere else, feel free to just put a dot off in the ocean somewhere, and we'll make sure that we get that affiliated with your project when we describe it. Awesome. Give everyone just a few more seconds. All right, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Maddie, were you able to get a quick screen share?
Yep, got it.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to clear these. And so now what we would like you to do is, as you've all been thinking about these projects, we would like you to describe your project in 3 words. So based on your goals or your objectives or your desired outcomes, or just some of the overarching climate change challenges or vulnerabilities you've already been thinking about before signing up for this course. In 3 words, what would you use to describe your project? So for example, maybe I'm really interested in recreation in the national parks. And so 3 words to describe my project could be recreation, floodplains, and forest pests, because I'm working in a floodplain forest system. I'm really interested in recreation, and forest pests are a huge concern. So those could be 3 examples of those 3 words that you would include to describe your project. And so what we're going to do is, again, on this map, if you could re-add your dot and then add a text box with those 3 words of how you would describe your project. And if you could label your project title for us or your group, that would be great. And I know that you have to work together as a group to kind of figure this out. So feel free to chat back and forth with each other about 3 words that might make the most sense, or designate someone to put those 3 words down for your project, for your team. Awesome. Great. I'm seeing invasive, myconia, and eradication. Pasture lands, ecosystem, and restoration. Awesome. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Would anyone be willing to share and tell the group kind of what you're thinking with where your project is and why you picked those 3 words to describe your project? Any volunteers?
This is Andy Gill. I can go first.
That'd be great.
I was looking for ways to raise my hand, but some of the tools have disappeared now that I'm in adaptation or annotation, I guess. Although the picture behind me is Big Island, I was trying to figure out how to change it to our property. We have a significant amount of property, 1,600 acres in Leeward, Oahu, in the southern part of the Waianae Mountains. And our goal for the property is to restore the Hawaiian ecosystem, which will be challenging. It'll be a dryland forest restoration. I've picked a specific location near the Nanakuli Ridge in a gulch called Piliokahe, which has some soil, so it's better than some of our other ag lands. It's currently in grazing, and we also are having some alien species removed with the help of the Waianae Mountain Watershed Partnership right now. And the challenge will be to try to restore the natives in that area. Iliahi does grow there naturally, and we have an exposure, but we'd like to expand the restoration area. It's about as dry as you can get on our property because it's the farthest leeward. And we can send water out there from our water system, but we haven't yet. It's currently grazed, as I said. We have wildfire challenges on the entire property, so the grazing is keeping the cattle down, but also exacerbating other issues like erosion, as everyone knows. So I've picked that specific location and am hoping with this course to come up with some an action plan to work in Piliokahe.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Andy. Yeah, it sounds like you have some themes and goals for your project that might overlap with some others in this course as well. So hopefully we'll be able to make some of those connections between those who are focusing on that ecosystem restoration and those pasture lands and share some of the ideas you're all coming up with together. So thank you again for sharing. Would anyone else be willing to share what you're thinking about with the 3 words to describe your project?
Hi, my name is Sierra McDaniel from Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. My project is in a portion of the park in the southern portion of Hawaii Island. And my 3 words were native forest, drought, and invasive species. Native forest is our goal, and drought and invasive species are 2 of our major challenges. Drought definitely is going to occur, and we don't have much control over the occurrence, but we have some control over the response. And then invasive species, we do have much more control over occurrence. So those are my 3 words. And this is also similar to Andy. This is a post-cattle environment.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Sierra. I appreciate that a lot. And I'm excited to learn more too about what those native forests look like, because being in Colorado, I am not as familiar with your native forest systems. So thank you for sharing. Anyone else interested in sharing a little bit about your project?
Aloha. I'm Maggie from the Ko'olave Island Reserve Commission and Protect Ko'olave Ohana. The group just gave me the go ahead to speak, so I'm going to share. We chose hard pan water and UXO. All of our projects, it's kind of one big project, and it's to restore and revitalize Ko'olave Kanaloa. And doing that requires a lot of little projects kind of all over. And the biggest one, though, is tackling the hard pan. So 30% of the island is barren hard pan due to severe environmental degradation and erosion. After being overgrazed by uncontrolled ungulates for nearly 200 years, a lot of the native habitat of Ko'olave is in need of a lot of aloha and revitalization. So that's kind of the biggest piece, because the hard pan then leads to even more erosion through overland sheet flow when we have massive rain events, but also wind. Ko'olave sits at the bottom of a wind tunnel between Haleakala and Hawaii Island, and the Alenuihaha Channel just kind of straight on provides rocketing wind all the time, and massive, swells that also bring more movement. So the combined issues of the barren hard pan with continuing erosion, but there's also the presence of unexploded ordnance. So having been a bombing range for 50 years, it's always, unfortunately, once a bombing range, always a former bombing range. So we do have to deal with that safety hazard in place. And in terms of restoration, that means no digging in some areas. While some areas we can do some digging and outplanting in the ground, most areas require us to come up with really innovative techniques to get plants to establish a dryland forest where you have no dirt. But we've done it and we do it, and it's, you know, it's possible, and kind of this process will allow us to find better ways, not only to continue to adapt our practices in the field to be able to mitigate the new and maybe worsening effects of climate change that we're going to see, but also allow us to be real specific. We do have a strategic plan end date coming up in about, I think 5 years now. We're almost there. And so we need to start looking at how we're going to be evaluating some of these management choices and objectives that we've had in place for the last little bit. So yeah, is that good, guys? Thumbs up. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Maggie. I appreciate it. And hopefully this course will really help you have that intention, show your intentionality and how you're really connecting the dots from everything that you value and why you're intentionally coming up with some of these prescriptive adaptation actions for your project. So thank you so much for sharing. Katie, I saw your hand was raised.
Yeah, some of the group wanted me to share for Pu'uwa'awa'a. I'll share quickly. So some words would be community, and we're in North Kona on Hawaii Island. Some words would be community forest, drought, just our environment. It's a really dry place. And then we're incorporating community, so subsistence and livelihoods. The picture behind me is our work area that we're going to transition into native forest. So that's our pasture land that we're working with. So we're just starting that and building our stewardship plan. We actually just had a meeting last week with the community-based subsistence forest members. And the 2003-2005 Pu'uwa'awa'a management plan will also be under revision. So this is a good timing to help us apply some of the visioning we did last week to the objectives and how we'll get to those.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katie. That's great. And yeah, I appreciate all of the work that the Pu'uwa'awa'a team has really done to come up with your goals and objectives so far. And I'm excited to learn more about this project throughout this course. Anyone else interested in sharing a little bit about your project with the larger group?
I don't mind sharing. This is Chris Balzotti with the Nature Conservancy.
Thanks,
The area
Chris.
that we've actually got 3 preserves that we're very interested in always expanding the way we think about them and climate. But the one that I'm putting forward here is for Kamehame. The words I used was nest habitat and expansion. There's a small beach that is one of the most productive hawksbill turtle nests, and we work in partnership with some folks as well as the national park that are working to maintain that beach as a viable place for the turtles to nest at. But due to sea level rise, loss of the beach, and invasive species that have come in above the beach has kind of been frozen, and so there's not a whole lot of resilience or resistance for that matter built into the system as the climate changes. And so we're kind of thinking about targeting areas that we can do something about, such as reducing, predation, building more usable habitat above the existing beach, and even possibly thinking outside the box of assisted erosion down into the beach to keep a larger area available to the turtles. But yeah, that's the project that thinking at right now anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing. I really appreciate that. Is anyone else focusing on specific wildlife habitat as a component of their project and interested in sharing?
I can share. We're going to continue Hawaii Island. So I am with the Three Mountain Alliance Watershed Partnership, and we work all over Hawaii Island, but probably, and we haven't totally decided the area we're going to focus on is at Keoho, right between Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and Pumaka'ala Natural Area Reserve. And there's a lot of very rare species in that area, but important endemic forest bird habitat. And so we would probably be looking at ways to, like I have in there, rare species, watershed resources and reforestation. All of those will improve native forest bird habitat. It's very important habitat for endangered species found on Hawaii Island. So we're always looking to expand and improve that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Anyone else from the Big Island would like to share? What about the project who put down, let's see, silvopasture, reforestation, and biodiversity?
If not, maybe did we hear from our Kauai group already?
Cool. And if you don't want to share, that's totally fine. We do appreciate you putting down your 3 words to describe your project. We do want to just make sure we're giving everyone space to share your project with a larger group if you're interested.
I think someone's mic doesn't work from that group, so I got a message.
All right.
I can share if you folks want. Ours is pretty straightforward. This is Nate with the Oahu Invasive Species Committee. So ours is invasive Myconia eradication. As you might guess, invasive species are our focus at OISC. So our major species is one of the most invasive species in the world. It's Myconia calvescens. Right now, it predominantly resides in the southern Ko'olau range, which I understand is quite a big land area. So I'll be thinking about how to approach that given the suggested parameters of the management goal. But we, compared to some of the other islands, we have a much better hold on Myconia, and we do actually have a chance at eradication, albeit probably 100 years from now if things go as well as they could. And it also seems like the species that would be most affected by climate change, given the shift in potential habitat. So, yep, that's our project, and looking forward to figuring out how to work in climate adaptation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Nate. I appreciate it. Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of projects that invasive species will be a focus. And so as we're really thinking about adaptation and how increased temperatures and changes across the landscape might allow for an increase in those invasives, it'll be great to continue to share ideas and best practices across everyone participating in this course. So thank you. Anyone else interested in sharing anything about your project?
Hey, this is Woody Mallinson from Haleakala National Park. I wrote down degraded ecosystem stabilization. So this is a area in the southern side of the park where we'd like to recreate kind of a stable mid-elevation ecosystem. It's an area that was acquired in 2008 and was unfenced prior to that, and a ranch land, heavily grazed by ungulates and cattle in lower elevations, but mostly goats in mid elevation. And so yeah, we just kind of want to get anything growing to stabilize the soils and just try and recreate something. So it's a lot of the similar challenges to some of the other projects that were presented earlier. So yeah, looking forward to hearing from everybody and any suggestions. Hopefully we'll be incorporating it into the management plan. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Woody. I appreciate it. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what you can come up with for soil stabilization as a part of this course. Hopefully, okay, cool. Wanted to make sure I didn't freeze. Anyone else interested in sharing anything about your project or the 3 words that you chose to describe your project?
Aloha, this is
Zach.
Namaka Whitehead. Oh, sorry, Zach.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. Okay, so Natalie and I are selected a Kamehameha School's Mauka Kona land. I think we really need to narrow down, but about 120,000 acres of land in Ka'upulehu and Keohotu, Ahupua'a, that was grazed for like 100 years, even though it's not very good cattle land. And we've had it back, from grazing for about 20 years, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how to manage those lands properly. We've got lots of invasive weed problems, especially with fountain grass. We've got lots of sheep. We have some restoration that we're doing through Iahi harvest. There's a lot of different pieces there. And we're also focusing on some lands at Lupea with Colleen folks from Three Mountain Alliance. So we might decide to narrow down there. But one reason that we selected those lands is it's a place where we've seen some really severe drought over the past 20 years. And we expect to see a lot more in the future. And so we really need to consider how to incorporate that into our planning. And then, one more thing I'll add, we added stewardship as one of our words, because for us, community and people are a really important part of management, even in an area as remote as this. And so we do have hunting clubs that use our land, and we want to increase educational opportunities through stewardship. That's our project. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Namaka, for sharing that. I appreciate it. And thank you for including the community and people and as a part of why you chose stewardship as one of your words. I really appreciate that as well. Nate, you were going to share.
Oh, I was going to share as well. Yeah, cool. So I'm Zach. I'm working with Christian and Chloe, and we are working right below the Lapahoihoi forest on a plot of land there that used to be old sugarcane land. And the words we had put down was invasive species, native tree restoration, and watershed function. So we have a tree garden, Ohia tree garden here that we're working on, promoting the growth and caring for those trees. Managing invasive species that are not only growing in the garden, like guinea grass and stuff like that, but there's also strawberry guava on the property and other invasives that we'll be working to manage and reduce. And then also watershed function. So there are various streams that run through the property, removing obstructions, helping promote stream flow and promote a healthy watershed, as well as focusing on protecting ohia and propagating ohia and promoting the growth to also benefit the watershed and promote watershed health.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Zach. I appreciate that. And Christian sent me your step 1 this morning too. And so that looks, it all looks great. And one thing I mentioned with Christian was to start thinking maybe beyond 5 or 10 years with some of your goals and objectives, especially some of those loftier goals of really working on those stream flows and watershed function. So awesome. Thanks. Anyone else interested in sharing?
Hi, I'm Elena, and I'm working with the state of Hawaii on their statewide outdoor recreation plan. And so, yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with how to narrow down the scope for this workshop, but I was really interested in participating because the SCORP is essentially funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And in the past, the SCORP is prepared by the state of Hawaii every 5 years to leverage federal funding that will match state investments in outdoor recreation resources. And what some of the division managers at DLNR are interested in, from what we've heard, is really diversifying the public's understanding of recreational resources to include forests and wetlands and places that are not necessarily active recreational spaces, like compared to soccer fields, for example. So I was really interested to sort of hear from all of you folks about like what types of management strategies would be helpful and would need funding within the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Elena. I appreciate that. Does anyone have feedback or comments for Elena based on the SCORP?
I'll just say, Elena, this is Andy Gill with the Gill Everlands project at Palihua. There's quite a bit of interest in recreation in the forest. We offer some hiking opportunities and ecotourism opportunities. And for everybody else, I want to say that we have found that the hiking and ATV routes we are putting in for various purposes, whether it's mountain biking or whatever else. A main purpose is access for fire control. It was news to us back in 2014, where there was a 1,000-acre grass fire in Kalo'i Gulch on our neighboring property, that the firefighters were all using our recreational trails to access the fire and get their hoses down and so forth. So we are seeing recreation as one of a menu of uses for these routes. But right now we are seeing more family hikers looking for opportunities in the pandemic that we're able to offer through our Camp Palihua. There's absolutely no doubt that forest trails are recreational assets.
Yeah, thank you. And I think to add to that, one of the goals in the 2021 SCORP is to really speak to like how damaging and consumptive some of the recreational uses of forest spaces and wetlands can be. And so I think like moving forward, just yeah, I'd like to learn more about some of like the data that would support just some of the foot traffic that some of these spaces receive, and maybe some of the mitigation opportunities associated with that.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy and Elena. I appreciate that discussion. And hopefully, I know we didn't do it today, but in a lot of our future discussions, we're going to split out into breakout groups. And so that'll give us a chance to have some more of those specific discussions based on your projects and your geographic location, but also some of the topics that you're prioritizing for your management goals and objectives and those values for the lands that you manage and steward. Anyone else interested in sharing? We have a few more minutes before we want to try to wrap up and get you all out by 10:30.
Good morning. This is Yumi with Waianae Mountains Watershed Partnership.
Good morning.
I just wanted to share, we had several different partners that were interested. And so I was like, we had to make a decision of who we would focus on. But our focus is going to be Makaha Valley. Our goal is to do forest restoration, erosion management, and with the goal of like water recharge, focusing on our water recharge efforts there. So we have a lot of different moving pieces, but fortunately we're trying to break down our MUs into smaller areas. So the area that we're looking at is about 80 acres total that's fenced.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thank you so much, Yumi. Is there anything else you wanted to add about that project?
Well, it's kind of an ongoing project. So we have different units that we're already working in Makaha. So this is something that would just expand what we're currently doing. There is a community outreach component to it as well, but with the COVID, with everyone dealing with COVID right now, that's the only really challenging portion of our project. So we're doing virtual propagation lessons and exercises with our students, but we're not able to take out kids at this time. So we are at a loss of, about 5,000 to 6,000 volunteers for the area, which is kind of killing us right now. But yeah, so the primary focus is propagating our own plants, restoring the area. Obviously, invasive species removal. We want to try and remove as much of the invasive species canopy as possible, and then restore back with plants that we have been collecting from the general area surrounding Makaha Valley.
Excellent.
And it's also, it's also owned by Board of Water Supply. So their focus is also on water quality and water recharge. And I think that's it for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Yumi. I'm sorry that COVID has created so many challenges with your volunteer base. I know that that's a challenge a lot of people are facing right now. So hopefully we can continue to come up with some solutions moving forward. But I empathize with you for that. Anyone else interested in sharing? All right. Well, thank you all so much for telling us a little bit more about your projects and really what you're thinking about when it comes to some of your management goals and objectives and the different climate impacts that you're already facing and have really played a role in informing which projects that you've chosen and why, and some of those examples of what you're going to be thinking about moving forward over the next 8 weeks. And then Heather, I did see you wanted to introduce yourself, so I wanted to make sure you had a chance to do that before we move on.
Yeah, I just thought I'd take a moment to say hi since my face is on here, and I'm hoping to join many of the sessions. I don't have an active project that I'm working on because I'm not a manager, but I work with the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, who partners with a lot of the people that help pull this together, funding climate adaptation research for the purposes of informing management decisions. So I'm here to basically learn more, and I just have to really thank you. It's been a really informative morning already. So you won't see me on a project team, but I may be in here trying to just gauge what everybody is working on and what the high priorities are. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you so much for joining us and for all of your support of this course. And we'll definitely be reaching out to you for resources and that climate science. And yeah, feel free to jump in whenever for the discussion as well, even though you don't have a project, that's not a concern for us. So thanks for introducing yourself. Anyone else? Ryan, would you like to mention what you're thinking of with the climate change, vulnerability, and drought portfolios?
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today. Also, really appreciate you making the time to participate in this course. We really value your contributions, and I'm really excited about it, especially after getting going this first day. But what I wanted to mention to everybody on the call is that we have developed this very streamlined way to put together a portfolio for individual geographies that provides information about mean climate characteristics. We have 100 years of rainfall and drought trends, and then several, things that like what happens during an El Nino in terms of rainfall. So there's a lot of climate information specific to your geographies. And for many people on the call, I put those together. But after hearing some of the, some of the discussion, I realized that I could possibly refine some of those for, say, for Yumi, if you're just focusing on one of the watersheds and not the entire mountain range, then maybe I can revisit that portfolio for you. And then for those of you who have not received the climate portfolio from me, all I need is some spatial information. So a shapefile, or at the very least, some grid coordinates, and I can put that together for you. And then you can kind of start off your course here with some really site-specific information, and that might help inform some of your decisions. So I'm happy to work with you on an individual basis. You just need to email me, and we can get a conversation going over email. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out anytime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan. And thank you, Heather. And I know we're coming up close to 10:30. And so if you have any other questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, or you can email Ryan or Maddie or myself with any additional questions or follow-up that you have. And those climate portfolios Ryan is putting together are going to be really beneficial for thinking about that step 2. Anyone else have any housekeeping items or any last minute questions? Or anyone else want to introduce themselves who doesn't have a project yet and didn't get a chance to say anything earlier?
I'll go. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Coons. I'm currently a master's student in natural resources and environmental management at UH Manoa, and have been kind of part of the Hawaii Drought Knowledge Exchange project with Ryan and Abby and Christian. And I don't have a particular place, but I'm here to kind of see what folks are thinking about and learn how folks, and actually I've gotten to talk to some of you about your drought concerns, but I'm here to kind of round out my understanding of what people are working with and dealing with. So glad to be here with you all.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate that. And thank you for joining us and for bringing your knowledge and expertise to all of these discussions. We appreciate it. Anyone from the Southwest Climate Hub want to introduce themselves quickly? I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to do that verbally earlier.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Steele, and I'm the coordinator at the Southwest Climate Hub. And I'm really excited to be a part of this course and looking forward to meeting my group. So thanks, Courtney, for arranging everything, and team.
Thanks, Katie.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm also with the USDA Southwest Climate Hub, and I'm just really excited to get to meet you all and kind of learn more and hear about your projects.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren.
I'll go real fast. Hi, everyone. I'm Rihanna. I'm also with the USDA Southwest Climate Hub, and I'm excited to be working with the Ho'olave group and to hear about the rest of the projects as well. And it's great to meet y'all today.
Thanks, Rihanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie. I'm with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. Sorry if I cut off another Southwest Hub person. I'll be working with the Oahu and Kauai groups. And yeah, pleased to meet you all. This was awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Maddie. Anyone else?
I see Maud is connecting to audio. She might be having connection problems.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that's probably the case as well. So I just want to reemphasize that the Southwest team and Maddie from NIAX have been instrumental in also putting this course together and are going to be a really huge help in facilitating some of the discussions that we have, especially when we go into those breakout groups and later sessions. So thank you to all of them for helping out with this course and bringing their expertise and knowledge with climate adaptation as well. And with that, I know we're a little bit past time. So for next week, I just wanted to remind you all that our next lecture is going to be Tuesday, February 2nd at the same time, 9 a.m. And we're really going to start talking about understanding and evaluating climate change vulnerabilities. And so we're not going to have a formal discussion, but there will be opportunities for lots of questions. Ooh, I guess I should have cleared. There we go. There'll be lots of opportunities for questions next week. And then Ryan is also going to be co-presenting next week on some climate resources that are offered by the East-West Center and also available for Hawaii and the Pacific Islands. And so that's what we will be covering next week. So with that, thank you all. Mahalo so much for a great first session. And it was great to get to know all of you and a little bit more about your projects. And I'm looking forward to starting to talk about climate change vulnerabilities with you all next week. So thanks again, everyone, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Thanks, Courtney. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, everyone.